God's truth is enduringly true throughout all the generations. It transcends culture. The church is always going to be an embattled people. If it's swimming with the tide, it's not being the church of Jesus Christ. Look to the past, learn from the past, because the whole world lies in the power of the evil one.
China has more than 200 confirmed cases of coronavirus, it's called.
The entire state of California ordered to stay at home. That's 40
California has some of the strictest policies leveled against churches. Gavin Newsom's executive order threatens jail time and a $1,000 a day fine.
Government stopping people from going to church, Dr. Fauci?
When I went into the White House, when I sat in on the task force meetings, was a shocking level of gross incompetence.
The mortality rate from the virus was 0.2%, 99.8% survival, rather than the 3 or 4% mortality that the people were saying at the time.
The culture and the understanding of the people of Grace Church has always been, not only do you obey government, but you honor government.
Thousands of people in the streets, but you can't have church?
The hypocrisy of letting people riot, it helped us all understand one thing. This is not what they say it is.
By meeting, we're testifying the government has no jurisdiction here. I was arrested and driven to a maximum security prison.
The government has obviously turned up the heat on churches.
My daddy.
When the churches fall silent, the only religion left is the state.
We needed to make a biblical statement because we always put ourselves under the authority of the Word of God.
LA County threatened Pastor John MacArthur with jail time and arrest.
We were going to be sued. They wanted Grace Church shut down.
We wanted to go on the offensive and attack the health order as unconstitutional. This wasn't about health and safety. This was all about control and opposition to religious freedom.
As the government gets more corrupt and more corrupt,
snitches get rewards.
Its totalitarian control has to increase.
And you have to have a mask on.
And as they shut down any attacks against them,
this is not about freedom or personal choice.
The last thing standing is going to be the church.
So what you just witnessed is the teaser for the upcoming film, The Essential Church, by Shannon, who is a director, if I'm correct, of Grace Productions. Is that correct?
Yeah, Grace Productions. It's a department of Grace Community Church. We're a part of Grace Community Church, and I'm the writer-director of The Essential Church.
Which I'm kind of curious, like, what is Grace Productions, and like, when did it start? Yeah, so Grace Productions, I don't know if I should get into a lot of details, but essentially during COVID, when we started doing more media that was going to be pushed out to the public and was going to be more narrative-based, it became a department that oversaw that, essentially. And I was hired during the lockdowns to help with that as a creative director. And then we pitched The Essential Church as our next big project, or really our first big project. And yeah, and then it just was, they greenlit it, and it was the next 2 years, that's all we've been focused on. So like, can you just like describe yourself and your filming background? Obviously this is a massive project, but that's not, obviously wasn't just given to some random person. So you obviously had to have some filming experience behind you. So describe a little bit of your film background. Yeah, so I always have been a storyteller. I went to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena for film in the early 2000s. And then just focused on writing. I've written a screenplay that was optioned by Humble Pictures. It never got made, unfortunately. And then I went to work mainly as a head writer and creative director for a huge marketing firm that had thousands and thousands of clients, and basically just, created content. And got to write a lot of pithy short stories. and also worked on some docuseries stuff. Yeah, and so then during COVID, I was helping out at Grace Church. I've been going to Grace Church since the late 90s. And when I was asked to come on, I actually said no at first. I wasn't, I didn't think that would be a good career move. It didn't feel like that is what I should do, to go work for your church. You want to be a filmmaker, you want to continue making films, go work for your church. But that's exactly what happened. Is I went to work for my church and have had the joy of working on, you know, some of the funnest projects and even more creative and really in my wheelhouse, just because I'm a Christian. I'm fascinated by the stories that, you know, we're telling, and the Essential Church is one of those.
Yeah, so I want to get a better understanding of, like, why focus on, where did the initial spark come to be with this film? Like, why did you start making this documentary? And then after that, you can describe, what is this documentary about?
Yeah, so when we finally opened back up, and it was earlier than most churches, but when we finally opened back up, there were a lot of people that disagreed with us opening up, and they had a lot of criticisms for our leadership and the choices they were making. And they did not agree nor think it was biblical for what we were doing. We were defying the government, and we most definitely are not a church known for that. If anything, we're known for being supportive of the government, supporting the police, respecting authority. Well, Romans 13, where it says to, you know, submit to the governing authorities, we would preach that. You know, we recognize the sovereignty of God in our leaders, even the leaders that we know are godless, which we currently have in a governor right now from California. But we also know God's sovereign over all that, and you know, we're not a church of political zealots. We just aren't. Right. That's not our brand. That's not our ministry. It's not what we do, because that's just biblically, that's not what we're called to do. So when this happened and we defied the government and then even sued the government, that was just off the chart for some people in their minds. They could not believe we were doing that and could not understand how we would do a 180 and do something like that. In their mind, we were doing a 180. In reality, we weren't. But in their mind, we were. And so a lot of those people left, and they never came back. And you would explain things to them, but it was hard to tell them, well, you couldn't really pull back the curtain on what the elders were going through, what our leadership was going through during that process of working out these biblical concepts and why they can say, yes, it's right for us to open the church and defy the government, even at the threat of fines and imprisonment. They couldn't believe that, and so we thought, wouldn't it be great to make a film and kind of just tell the whole story and really pull back that curtain and show what Grace Church went through. But not just Grace Church, because this documentary really is not about Grace Church. It's about the church globally, and the church just in general, because a big part of this film is I really wanted church history to be a big part of this film, and was really excited about that. So we look at the church in the past, present, locally, and then globally through the Canadians, and I weave the story in and out through those three elements. But we wanted to tell that story so that those people who left could maybe hopefully watch it and say, see, this is why we did what we did, and this is how it happened. And if you still disagree, that's fine, but here's the whole truth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had the privilege of watching the documentary myself, and it was very well done. And I had friends and family that criticized John MacArthur, and they kind of pin it on John MacArthur as well, like he's authoritarian, like he's the one that's opening up this church, like he's the guy that's calling all the shots. But I think what you laid very well was like, no, there were a lot of like split, like divisions within the elder boards. Like some were like do not open, some of them were like fully open, some of them actually changed their mind and all that. So it wasn't like a John MacArthur thing, it was actually an elder-led thing. Now I'm kind of curious though, you mentioned you know, Grace Church, and then you have churches in Canada. Why did you decide to focus more on local churches rather than just maybe like a video essay of a broad overview of all the churches and their different responses?
I think that to latch on to certain stories that represent the church and that you can show it that way is just a stronger spine and story. To have protagonists that you can follow from the beginning to the end. And I have those three protagonists. It's Grace Church, Grace Life Church in Canada, and Tim Stevens Church, Fairview Baptist. So telling their stories from beginning to end represent the church, and then weaving in the past of the church history gives it that, you know, that puts steel in its veins of what they've done in the past. And just kind of putting that all together, I felt that that was a stronger story that had a stronger protagonist with a goal. And those are the kind of stories I like. So that was my choice.
You know, I think I was very, I think that's a very good, like, direction choice too, because it's like, you're able to focus locally. It feels more real rather than just like, you know, getting perspectives from every different side, because each church had their own unique struggle. So why not focus on, you know, John MacArthur's church and other churches in Canada? Now, I do have a question though. There was one story that was interweaved throughout the documentary, and that's the woman throwing the stool. Like, where did you find that, and why did you decide that to kind of be the catalyst of the story?
Well, you know, and I don't know, people aren't catching on. Maybe I haven't, the film hasn't gone out to everybody, so I haven't gotten total feedback on it, but the dates are really important. And if you'll remember, it said July 23rd, and I made a real important point about that. This is July 23rd, 1637. And then when the elders voted, it was July 23rd, 2020.
Oh. Okay, so it's almost exactly when that happened. Okay.
Exactly. And I did it that way. You know, the reality is John MacArthur brought that up at the elders meeting. He brought up Jenny Geddes, and that's how I learned about it. Is because people said, yeah, he talked about Jenny Geddes and that this was the anniversary of her throwing her chair. So since it was the anniversary, and I chose to do that strictly visual. I didn't want to undercut it by them saying it before I revealed the date, because I felt like it had more power in revealing the date in the way I did, and it rolls back and you see that you come back. I don't want to give away the film. Lots of people haven't seen it. But yeah, I start the first act and end the first act with the Jenny Geddes story because it's connected to our story at Grace Church. And we were kind of like that. We were throwing our chair at the state. We essentially were throwing it. We were picking up our chair and saying, "We're throwing this at you," and it's biblical. You know, that was us throwing our chair, and she had the spirit of that. And as you saw in the documentary, she was a spark that kind of lit this national covenant, which was 6 months later. They came out with this statement stating why they would not compromise the head of the church. That was also similar to us in the fact that we came out with a statement, we put it out across the world. So, and yeah, you see that in the film. So.
So we are beginning to see persecution from government. This is the most formidable persecution.
So I think now, kind of switching gears a tad bit, I'm a production guy. I love seeing, you know, production stuff and behind the scenes, and I kind of want to unveil the curtain a little bit on how this film kind of came to be. So I think the first question, I think you alluded to it a little bit, was when did production start? When was like the first like day of like, okay, let's start working on this. Let's start working on this. Maybe you don't have to give a specific date, but maybe give in general, like maybe 2 years ago.
It was definitely 2 years ago, a little less than 2 years ago, I think. And honestly, I was writing it, and it was Shepherd's Conference 2 years ago, actually. So not this past one, but the one before it, we showed a teaser. And I knew that I was going to involve the 1975 tape of John MacArthur saying that he would sue the government. if the government ever came in here and tried to shut down the church. It was crazy. Like, are you serious? You said that in 1975? But I shot that for the Shepherds Conference. And I said, okay, because they were like, we want something for the Shepherds Conference for the teaser. Be honest with you, I was like, I don't really want to stop writing. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. It's kind of disrupting my flow. And then I want to shoot everything and then make teasers and trailers.
Yeah.
But we needed a teaser, so that's what we came up with. And I was like, that's something that's controllable and I can do quickly and it can still be really cinematic. So we went up to Grace to You and shot that. And that technically was when we first shot that, because I used all that footage, as you saw in the film. So that was probably a month before Shepherds Conference 2 years ago. 2 years ago. So I don't know when that is. So Shepherds Conference is in March, right? So it would have been February. February? Is February before March? Yeah. January, February, March. February. So the beginning of February is when we actually started principal photography 2 years ago.
So,
I didn't think I was going to be able to answer that, but I figured it out. Okay.
you had to reverse engineer a little bit. So I don't know if you heard this saying, but a story is written 3 times. First in the script, then in the shooting, and then in the editing. So the first written part of the film is in the pre-production. I did look through some of your Instagram, and I saw some, production photos, which, by the way, I need your ask permission. Can I use some of those photos in this interview? Just show it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I love people to see like the behind the scenes, the amount of work that kind of went into it. I did see one shot where I think you were in a coffee shop and there was this computer right there and had 2 programs open. One of them was like a storyboard and the other one was the script. So like what programs did you use to do that? And how? And because I think with a documentary like this, sometimes it can be a little difficult to write a script because the direction could change. So
yeah. So I didn't use any special storyboarding program. I write on Final Draft, so that probably was Final Draft 11 or 12. And the storyboards were basically, my storyboard artist was sending me shots that I was still creating, and we were in Scotland. And so he would email them to me, and I was just opening it and looking at the script and thinking through, is that the only shot that I'm going to have, or am I going to add shots to that? So I was working on for a shoot the next day. So yeah, Final Draft, and then it was just a PDF of his drawings. He's a great storyboard artist. We're fortunate to have him. He goes to our church as well. And then your other question, what was your other question?
It was like the script, though. Sometimes with a documentary, it can be a little difficult because like sometimes the direction can change. Did you have like a bullet point list of like, here's what we want to cover and let's see where it goes? Or did you had like, let's have like a script with a narration over it?
Yeah, so I had to research everything before we ever shot. And I would say you have to do that no matter what. I suppose if you have unlimited funds, you can do it, just on the fly, and figure it out. But I researched the story. I figured out the timeline. I figured out where I felt my first act was ending and hooking us and pulling us into the second act, where I understood our protagonist goal. Look, at the end of the day, documentary filmmaking, yes, there are certain craft aspects of it that are different, but principally, as far as the principles of storytelling, it's exactly the same as anything else. Whether you're writing a screenplay or whether you're writing a novel, I'm asking myself the same questions I would ask when I'm writing a fictional screenplay. It's no different. And I have to understand those points, especially with the change of the acts, so I can understand how I ask those questions, because I'm looking for certain things that will get me there and get me into and pull me into that second act as far as the goal of the protagonist and things like that. And then I even figured out where my second act ended and my third act began. And I was okay if that was going to change. But to do that, you have to understand the story and the big plot points, what your protagonist wants, who is your antagonist, why is your antagonist pushing against your protagonist, all of that. I'm asking, what's my climax? What's the climax of the film? You know, I have to know those things. What's happening in that climax, what's being communicated. And I'm going to ask questions so that I hit those marks. And I'm going to ask my interviewees the best I can to try to hit those marks. And whoever does it the best, I'm going to use theirs. And now as far as writing that, I don't know what they're going to say. So I can't write their dialogue, obviously, or their interview exactly. But I know during this scene, I'm going to do this. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to need this shot and this shot and this shot. And then I'll just write it as if it's going to happen. It's probably going to change, but that's fine. And so the script I held very loosely in my hands. The thing that was more concrete was going to be the reenactments of the church history stuff. So I would research that and do my reading, and then I would just write it as I would want to shoot it. And that pretty much, only thing that changes with that is, again, when you're in the editing bay, you're cutting and you're cutting and cutting. And so I'm not necessarily changing what I'm writing other than I'm just cutting things out and cutting things out.
I know, that's the hardest thing too, is like you just want to add so much and you're just like, oh, it's like right now 3 hours. You got to keep cutting it down.
Exactly.
Trying to cram as
over 3 hours, and I needed to get it down to at least 2, which I was able to do. But,
I mean, that's the challenge of editing, is to get as much context in the shortest amount of time possible while keeping the context, you know, and have it flow naturally.
Yeah.
So,
and there were points. Sorry, I'll go ahead and ask your question.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead. There were some points.
In the editing, I'm moving on to the editing process now. For 3 months, I worked with an editor at Kappa Studios in Burbank, and it was just me and him. And I'm just over his shoulder. He doesn't have any clue about the story, really. And he doesn't know what I know. And he wasn't a Christian.
That's
it was completely brand new to him, which was very interesting, because I would put it together and then he'd be like, I don't know what that means. I'd be like, that's okay. So I need to figure out how this can make sense to you. And so it was a good process, and it was for 3 months. We would work long hours editing that thing. And at the end of the 3 months, I only had 3 months with him. We were just scrambling, I was just trying to get as much as I could done. And then I spent another 2.5 months just editing it myself, and with another assistant editor here at our studio. So there was definitely a process of rewriting.
Yes.
You wrote it, you made sure you got as much as you can to get what you need. And then there was another rewriting process. But believe it or not, it really, all those major points that I wrote down and that I had planned from the very beginning actually all stayed the same. I hit those points where I thought I was going to hit them. There were times when I was editing, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to change this. This isn't working. But I said, no, I envisioned it this way. I need to try harder. I need to make this work and find a way, and then it worked. So it was a fun process, but a lot of hours.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so okay, so then there was pre-production. Now we're going to the production side of it as well. I think it looks like you traveled to a lot of different places. What are some of the places that you traveled to get some of the shots?
Yeah, so we went to Scotland, which really was the gem of all of our travels. I don't know if you've ever been to Scotland, but
no, but from the pictures of your Instagram, it looked pretty.
Yeah, yeah,
it looked very pretty.
Like heaven, and then there's Scotland, and then there's the rest of the earth.
Yeah, I think Alistair Begg said Scotland is like heaven. But anyways, continue.
Yeah, So it was. Yeah, we were in Edinburgh. And originally I wanted to shoot in St. Giles. So St. Giles is the actual church in downtown Edinburgh where Jenny Geddes threw her chair. That's where it happened.
Okay.
The historical things are all there. They're all still up. All the buildings are there. Everything's the same. I mean, obviously certain little things have changed, but really that's St. Giles has been there, I don't know, 600 some years, longer than that maybe, I don't know. That's crazy, because in America, we don't have anything that old.
No, we don't.
Yeah. So when you go to a building, you're like, this building's been here a long time, and lots of historical things. Like John Knox preached in this building, and Jenny Geddes threw her chair at the Dean of Edinburgh right there. And then a riot broke out in this city, and it was awesome. But when we got to St. Giles, a day before, They tore up our contract. They figured out who we were, and they, like a lot of other people, don't like John MacArthur.
Really? Oh, wow. I'm shocked. I thought everyone liked John MacArthur.
Yeah. The pastor there is a female with a really short haircut.
Oh, well, there's your obvious sign.
Yeah, so then they found out about us. They didn't like us. So that was a bummer. They're like, wow, okay. And that happens a lot. We're like, okay, I have to rethink this. How am I going to do this? And you know, the Lord just always had something better. When something was taken out of our hands and we had no power over it, I learned through this film, I'm like, you know, usually when that happens and I have no way of correcting it, I have no way of like fixing this, it's completely taken out of my hands, that means something better's in store for us. And that always happened. And it was really interesting. So I wasn't sad that we didn't shoot in St. Giles. It was better for our trip. We spent most of the time outdoors, which I loved. And we got amazing shots because they had secret church, not in a building. They had secret church out in fields. And I found some amazing fields, let me tell you. Yeah, we were in Glencoe in Scotland. If you ever have a chance, it's like the northern part of Scotland. That's an amazing, I think they shot the latest Skyfall was shot there. The 007 stuff. His mansion was out there. That's
oh, really? No kidding. No kidding. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. No wonder the vistas look so good. Okay. Yeah,
just amazing hills and mountains and cliffs and everything's green and waterfalls.
And there's nobody around, so you can blow the building up.
That's right.
So with all the shots that you took, like, what was the most difficult one that you had to try to capture? Or were they all difficult in varying degrees?
I think the most difficult ones were whenever I wanted to move the camera a lot. So I like to move the camera a lot. I like dolly shots. And so whenever we had to, and I had shots where I'm like, we're super wide, and then we're going to go all the way into a macro on this little picture. And we're going to pass through all these rooms. And we're going to cut between them. And the reason I did that is because the whole thing about the chair is that it's kind of a lost moment in history. Nobody knows about it. It's unnoticed, even though it was this kind of big deal. And so I wanted something in the room that was unnoticed and took us a while to figure out what is the camera actually focusing on. And so that move, you'd think it's simple, but you know, we don't have a ton of resources. We can't have a huge crew, and we didn't always have a focus puller. And you know, you're dealing with a rental dolly that may not be doing so great, and the track isn't so great. And so that was probably the more difficult one. Yeah, I guess that's my choice.
Right, I mean, you know, there's...
I did the same move with J-Mac at his desk. And, you know, you're matching all those, and it was, when we did it with J-Mac, finally, it was towards the end of the shooting schedule, which we were shooting while I was editing.
Yeah. Oh, that's fun. That's really fun, because you're not only you're like putting the film together, but also on a time crunch, and you're like, oh, they're like certain pieces that you have to put in just to fill in the gaps, or like it'll help enhance the story.
We were on a big time crunch, and there was kind of a saying that became a thing that we would repeat over and over again. It's like flying a plane while you're trying to build it, and that's what it felt like sometimes. So, away it goes.
1660, the Covenanters signed their national covenant with their blood to resist to the death the claims of the king, to override the crown rights of the Redeemer and his church, King Jesus.
The government wanted to impress on people, look what happens. Brown was betrayed. Margaret Wilson and her younger sister Agnes, they were known to be Covenanting sympathisers. difficult to know how many were actually executed.
So, like, how difficult was it to? I mean, you interviewed a ton of people. You interviewed people from Canada. You filmed John MacArthur, even some people on the board, and even some health officials and some lawyers. Like, how difficult was to get some of the people you interviewed? Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, the lawyer's not so difficult. Everybody in our church is easy, and the reality is if you look at the credits and we say special thanks, a lot of those people were interviewees. So I didn't just interview the people that you saw. I probably interviewed 3 or 4 times more than that.
It just didn't make the cut.
Yeah. Yeah, and then no fault of theirs. It just became a point where, you know, I'm trying things, and I need to throw a wide net to see what I get from some of these folks.
Sure.
And I especially did that with our elders. It's not easy for people to talk about and be transparent about their disagreements. I don't think it comes naturally to all of our elders, and that's probably a good thing because they don't want to talk about all that stuff. But thankfully, I had a few elders, one of them being Chris Hamilton, that was like, okay, we can be transparent. We just don't have to say any names, but let's talk about it. He was a great storyteller. Phil Johnson told him he deserves an Oscar. Not because he was acting, but because he did such a good job. But yeah, anyway, that was easy finding those folks. Canadian folks, the only hard part about the Canadian folks is that you have to travel to Canada, and I have, again, limited resources and limited time. That was the problem there. Now with the lawyers, they're in San Diego, and Jenna came out to us, so that's all fine. That all worked out. But the Stanford epidemiologists, Scott Atlas, who was on Trump's task force, and Jay Bhattacharya, who's also at Stanford, that was a little more difficult because obviously they're busy guys and they have, you know, secretaries and people in front of them that you have to get through to get to them. And they don't know who you are. Oh, you're doing some kind of little church documentary. Why would I want to do that? You're like, is that worth my time? But you know, we stayed focused, and even when we went up to Stanford, it was up in the air if we were actually going to get the interviews. We went up there
right,
hoping that, you know, we could, if we were face to face, kind of like we're here, our guys are here, we're face to face, let's just make it happen. And we were able to do that. And Jay Bhattacharya and Scott Atlas did a great job. And Scott Atlas, man, there's so much more he said that I just didn't have room to put in the documentary, but those will be on the DVDs and Blu-rays. So you'll get to watch more of his raw interview, because he was on the task force basically going toe to toe with Fauci and Birx. So he has all sorts of insider stories on that is just fascinating.
Well, was he a Christian, or was he like just like opposing, or?
He's not a Christian. He's just sympathetic to the church.
Gotcha.
Jay Bhattacharya is a Christian. He goes to a Presbyterian church up in Stanford. Scott Atlas, I remember during the interview, he said that, you know, I'm not a person of faith, but you know, church is essential, especially in our country. It's in our First Amendment, and so he saw the value of church. In fact, he's coming to our premiere this July 23rd. July 28th, by the way, is when it's going to be in theaters, hopefully across the nation. But we have about 50 theaters now that we're in. On July 28th, that's when it really opens. But July 23rd are just a bunch of little private premieres, and we're having a huge premiere July 23rd at our church. And Scott Atlas is going to come with us and spend a day with us and see the movie with our church, and I'm excited about that. Same with Jay Bhattacharya, Jenna, all our lawyers, all that stuff. It's going to be really fun.
Yeah, and I think like those people that you interviewed, I mean, what I liked about the film is that it wasn't, I don't want to say it was one-sided. There was obviously an agenda, was church is essential, and but it was also, it let it breathe a bit. It's just like showing the thought process and the difficulty and struggles that went through it. So even people that I think were opposed to the lockdowns can actually sympathize with some of the disagreements that was portrayed in the film. So one question I had was, I think you probably alluded to it before. Did the story change at all in any of the when you did the interview process, or not really?
I would say that I discovered a few things that I didn't know in the interview process, but I don't think it changed anything. I think that's, you know, when we watch a documentary, we think that that's how it happens.
Sure.
But now, especially doing a feature, I just don't think that's the way it's done most of the time. I could be wrong, but I think that most of the time they know their story and they know what they're trying to hit and they have a goal. But yeah, I mean, there were things that I learned about the Canadian story that I did not know. But I tried to do pre-interviews, you know, before I even started writing that stuff, so that I knew their story and I knew what I was going to try to pull off and shoot. Yeah, so I think, for example, here's a change. I shot, this is funny. I had this idea of, when I was in Canada, having James would sometimes work out by ice skating. And there's this competitive aspect to him and to John MacArthur, and I thought that'd be a neat connection because they were both athletes, and you know, this kind of, and I think John sort of brings that to his ministry, not in a competitive way of against other Christians, but a competitiveness of like, I'm going to fight for the truth.
Right. Right.
And I'm gonna wake up in the morning and like an athlete, and I'm going for this. And I'm not leaving anything on the field. And so I thought it might be kind of cool to try to introduce an athletic aspect to it. And I had James, like, I filmed him. It looked great. And I was really excited about it. But I filmed him doing sprints, ice skating back and forth in his full, like, hockey stuff. So we actually rented a ice hockey place in Canada. I got him on skates. We got our DP on skates and got a Ronin, got our FF6 on a Ronin, and just like was getting all these shots. And I had my shots planned out. It was awesome, but I didn't use any of it in the film.
And the thing is, I think Aaron Coates on Instagram kind of posted some of that stuff. And I was thinking, like, I was watching the documentary. I was like, where is it? Like, I want to see James Coates in like a hockey gear, but apparently not. So I know. It's one of the heartbreaking things in the editing process. You're just like, I can't put it in there. So
funny thing is, he probably doesn't want me to share this, James, but he was like going for it. Like, you know, I was like, all right, go, action. And like, boom, 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 boom. And he'd be sprinting. After a few of those, he was like, he got sick, like nauseous. Like he was going to, he was over a trash can for a while. We had to like stop for a while because, you know, that's hard to do when you haven't done it in a while, and you're doing ice skating sprints, going back and forth. And yeah, maybe I should edit it together and put it up just for the fun of it.
You know, I would love to see the blooper reels of. I love to see it, but that will probably come in the DVD version. So I want to switch gears now to the editing side. So after all of that, you said it took like 3 months to edit it. Can you describe some of the process of it? Because apparently I didn't, you were working with a non-Christian. So was it very difficult, or was it actually easy? And he's coming from this from a completely blank slate too. He has no like insight as to the situation, what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say that, just to correct you, it wasn't 3 months, it was probably more like 5.5 months.
Oh, sorry, then, okay.
Yeah, which is actually a short amount of time for a film this size. And the amount of footage we had, honestly, you could have taken it 8 to 12 probably. But yeah, the first 3 months was with him, and that really was beneficial for the film, to have somebody that has fresh eyes on the material and is working through the story with me, and maybe doesn't see it right away. And I have to be able to say, no, you need to do this, and this is why. And I have to, you know, make that argument. And if it doesn't make sense to me after making that argument, then I'd be like, okay, well, then maybe I should cut it. You know, if I can't make an argument for it, maybe I should cut it. And so that was kind of a purifying effect on the film that I thought was good. Also, since he's not a Christian, and just to, you know, give you a context of what I mean when he's not a Christian, he overheard a conversation I had with somebody, and somebody had passed away at church, and I said, well, something to the effect like, that's, they're with the Lord now, and that's awesome. And then when I hung up on the phone, he says, what do you mean they're with the Lord? They're with the Lord now. Like, that's an interesting saying. He's like, well, and I said, well, yeah, they're with the Lord now. They passed away and they knew Christ, and they're now with him. And that was like a saying he had never heard before.
Really? Wow.
So he's like really removed from like any Christians at all. He grew up in Hollywood, with his dad was the producer of Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's his background. So so that was interesting, and I think the film benefited from that. And working with him in that. So that was good. And then there was times where I just had to get by myself at night and work on it. I was working with an assistant editor here, which was awesome. Again, another set of fresh eyes to kind of, try to poke holes in things. But then there was times I'm like, okay, I'm just going to, and that was a lot of it, actually. I just was like, I got to work on this tonight. And I'd be in late hours. Because I was really concerned at one point. I was like, I'm concerned this isn't going to be good.
Yeah, that's always the fear. That's always the fear. I mean, even when, you're always trying to get the perspective of the audience, because you're just like, is the audience going to understand what am I trying to convey? Are they going to understand the story? Are they going to try to understand the point? Because it's easy to like misinterpret it or just even miss it as well. And I think what you even said too, you found it beneficial to have fresh eyes on the project, because it is very easy to get so wrapped inside the project that you kind of overlook some of the fatal flaws in a film. Which I do have to ask though, in the technical side, there were some animation portions, like with 3D animation. Was that with a separate company that did the stuff, or was that all in-house?
We did that all in-house.
Oh, can you please tell me the program? Because I want to.
So this is what we came up with. Well, first of all, I wanted to originally shoot all the reenactments.
Sure.
And shoot them in a similar way where I'm not relying on the acting of the actor, but I'm shooting it in a way that I'm just getting the physical aspects of what the actor is doing. And so then I realized, okay, we don't have the resources to do that. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to change it. How do I, before I give up and say, okay, let's just animate it, I said, okay, I'll remove everything and I'll make it like this black space. And I wanted it kind of like, I came up with this idea to kind of have the similar lighting as I don't know if you've watched Stranger Things, but in the in-between world, if you look that up, of the shots where it's just black space and there's like water on the ground for reflection. But so I was just going to have actors and then the black space with that really cold lighting. And I was going to remove everything except just the actor and what they were doing. And shoot it in a similar way that you saw in the reenactments that we have now. But then I found out we don't even have the resources for that. So it became, okay, how do we have a motion graphics guy, Zach, who is really talented and is a go-getter and figures things out. And I couldn't land on an animation that was really striking me and making me feel better about what I was losing and what I was envisioning with the reenactments live. And then he showed me these plaster characters, these 3D plaster characters. And I thought, okay, that could be cool. But then it dawned on me what would really be cool is if I make them look like they're coming out of the graveyard.
God, yeah.
That's church history. So they actually look like the stone statues and the stone tombstones in the graveyard. And if you watch the film, she starts off in the graveyard and she's leaving the graveyard going to church, and she takes her stone chair. So it became like, okay, then I got really excited because we can make them look like stone from a graveyard and really lean into that. And I got really excited about that. And then what Zach said is, we could do this in what's called Unreal Engine.
Oh, okay. I see.
And so all you have to do is sculpt the statue, which we did from scratch. Now, we did shop that out because we didn't have the manpower to get it done in time.
Sure.
So we found a couple guys in different countries, actually. I think Brazil and Germany, who were a little cheaper than local. And we gave them the drawings. We gave them the direction. I would go and work with our artists here and like what I wanted the character to look like. I'd find references for those characters, give them to the artist. They'd sketch out something. Then we would do a 3/4 and a from behind sketch of the character, and then we would sculpt them. And then Zach would then put the stone on them here. And then in Unreal Engine, what you can move is the camera. So then I can move the camera wherever I want, and I can light it however I want. So I could sit down with Zach and be like, I like this shot. I like this shot. I don't like this shot. Move it in here, move it out here. And I was actually able to get a lot of the shots that I was envisioning in the script originally.
Yeah.
For the shot when you're coming away from the water, I envisioned that from day one, and how the wide shot when she throws her chair and all that stuff. I was able to do all that because you could just move the camera here, move the camera here. And then you just do it, and it like records it like you're shooting a film. And then you have this high res, great image, and you just plop it in your timeline, and you got your reenactment. That's how we did it.
Why would you die for church polity?
We talked about a lot about the production side, and thank you for giving me some insight, because it's always interesting to see like the creative mind of like why'd you go this direction, like why'd you get these shots, like, and a lot of people don't understand like it takes a lot of work and a lot of energy and a lot of time and a lot of thought process just to get some of these shots and try to tell a simple story. And so but with all of that, what would you say is like one of your favorite scenes in the documentary that really hit home, or it's like, wow, like it finally came to life? Like what was one of your favorite scenes in this documentary?
I was absolutely pleased with how the two Margarets came together. And that was the two ladies that were tied to the stake in the River Solwell. And we actually went to the location and shot there. I loved those days when we were shooting there. There was a graveyard nearby that we shot as well, because I was just like, this is a great graveyard. And we got up super early. I'm like, we got to get up early in the morning because the sun is rising up there. I want it all backlit. So we would get up early in the morning and get these awesome shots. And then when it was intercut with what we did in the black space, that's we call it the black space for the 3D animation stuff. It just worked so well. And then I found references for the score while I'm editing. I find stuff that I like and I put it in the timeline and I try different things. And that's a really nice way to give our composer references for that piece. And that was, the composer killed it as well. So that was I just came out so beautifully, how we move into that scene with the water. And it really turned out the way I wanted it. You hear the shovel, you hear the soldier digging. You have the overhead drone shots of that muddy water and stuff like that. I just love that stuff. And then you just cut to it, hard cut. I was really pleased with that. And I was really pleased whenever I watched the gospel part, which was one of the last things that I edited together, which comes in right after that. And I wanted the gospel after all of the suffering, if you will, because the gospel is what pulls us through that suffering. It's the truth of the gospel, the truth of who Jesus is. That is why we made this movie and why we don't compromise his headship in the church. And I really enjoyed it. I edited that together one night, and it just worked really well. And I watched it again, and I love how it flows. So we go from the two Margarets into the gospel, and I really like that. That's my favorite part.
So, obviously, when you're going through this documentary, sometimes sometimes it changes you personally. Like, what have you grown or learned much from making this documentary?
I would say that it's not so much maybe I guess technically that inside in making the documentary, I learned a deeper understanding or deeper trust in God's sovereignty. As I said, things would be taken away from us and we had no power whatsoever to try to get it back. And that seemed like a horrible thing in the moment, but then you realize the next day, oh, the Lord just fixed it and it's better. It's better than what I was going to do. So that happened multiple times. It happened in Inverness when we were interviewing Ian Hamilton. He was amazing, and he kind of takes over our church history segments as our interviewee. And I lost his set completely. The day before, the night we show up in Inverness, it's 9 p.m. I had found an Airbnb that also had a living room that looked like a Scottish study. So we were going to sleep on the second floor and shoot on the first floor. And we had everything dialed in, figured out. We get there and somehow it got double booked. I never heard of that happening ever, but we did not have a place to stay the night or shoot the next day. We had nothing. So we've flown all the way in Scotland and everything we planned was thrown out the window, everything.
Wow.
And within 2 hours, we had a better place to stay because we got hooked up with William Mackenzie, who is the owner of Christian Focus Publishing, who happens to live in that town.
Oh, really? Oh.
And somebody told him, and he said, they can stay at my house. And he has a nice home in a nice neighborhood in Inverness. And we all had our own rooms. And then they made us dinner and they made us breakfast. And wonderful hosts. We sang psalms together and it was amazing. And then they said, well, I own a house because William provides most of the barley for Macallan whiskey, which is high-level whiskey.
Wow.
So he has all these farms where he has barley on the north coastline of Scotland. He owns all of it, and he owns this house from the 1750s that all have like 6 different Scottish studies for me to choose from.
Wow.
So I went literally from nothing to the best I could possibly have in that location. That's kind of amazing to me. And when you talk about the sovereignty of God and you start to learn, okay, something better is in store. I'll just be patient, not gonna get too depressed about this and see what happens.
And that's kind of the beauty of it too, because then it gives you a confidence knowing that God's hand is in this project and it's His will to have like this come to completion. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's struggles and sometimes you just get so frustrated you just want to throw something out the window. But there are times when you get stuff like that just really like invigorates you and make you feel like, yeah, God wants us to do this and to fulfill it to completion. But also it does require humility too as well, because it requires submitting and completely trusting in God and His sovereignty and all that. So wow, we talked about a lot of the production side. I was wondering, like, a lot of the shots. I was wondering, like, why'd you go this direction and all that. It was great talking to you in regards to that. So I'm wondering, like, what do you want people to get out of this documentary? Like, why should they go see it, or what do you want to get people out of this documentary?
Yeah. So I think that what I want is, I want people to watch it and to be challenged in their understanding of the relationship between the church and state. And that when, because the state, Satan always makes a play for the government. He always has. The Bible records him doing that. You can see that in Exodus, where the Pharaoh is not letting the people go, and God makes an example of basically the government, Pharaoh. Example right there where he's saying, no, my people obey me first, not the state. So then you have an example with Daniel, and he was told they were going to regulate his prayer time. He could not pray. And what did he do? He opened the windows so that the whole city could see and hear him pray.
Right.
He was going to be regulated by the state in what he was called to do and he knew was right before God to do. So, and then you have examples through church history time and time again, and that's why we did that, and we focused on church history, because even in our statement, that was the first tip-off to me, that I should look to the past and learn from the past, which is what Ian Hamilton says in the documentary. But we talked about the Covenanters, and our elders referenced them in our statement. If you read Christ, not Caesar, our statement goes through the Covenanters, and it talks about the Great Ejection, and I included both of those things in the film. So I want it all to put steel in their veins, and I think part of the other thing that I really want them to understand when it comes to church and state is that the state is not neutral.
Yes, yes, yeah.
They have a worldview, and most of it, actually, unfortunately, are people who are influenced by Marxist worldviews. Right. And they are making decisions according to that. When they are making decisions according to that, this is spiritual warfare at that point. And Christians need to understand that when they're dealing with the government, that they need to run it through their Christian worldview, driven by a biblical understanding of life and what they're supposed to do, and the truth and the gospel and the church. And, you know, that needs to be primary. And I think that a lot of Christians, good, Christians who believe and follow the Lord, maybe have not exercised that muscle very much. And COVID and the lockdowns caused us to do that. And I'm hoping that this documentary takes it a little further and helps them exercise that muscle a little bit more, so that when it happens again, and it may not happen in the same way, but it will happen again, that discernment is heightened as a result of this, and that there's steel in their veins as a result of this documentary as well.
Awesome. So where can people watch this documentary? Or how can they, what theaters, or how can they figure out where to go to see it?
Yeah. So we are trying really hard to get it in as many theaters as we can. We are up against some big blockbuster films coming out this summer. So to get a theater to give us a screen is challenging, but we've already gotten 50 theaters. We sent it to Cinemark, and they saw it, and they loved it. And the president, I believe, of Cinemark said that he wanted to film in his theaters. So we're in Cinemark and we're in Regal, and across the U.S. And the best way to find, that's July 28th. If you want to see this film, it's coming out July 28th. So the best way to do that is, I guess you can also go into an app. There's lots of apps that look up where the movie is, like Fandango does that. So I think you can put in the Essential Church, and then it'll show up in theaters, or what theaters near you, closest theaters. You can also go to our website, essentialchurchmovie.com. And you can put your email in there, and you'll get updated with all the current information as things unfold. And so, yeah, you could look and search the theaters in your area. You can look through an app to see what's the closest theater to you. And you might have to travel a little bit, hopefully not too much. And you can go to essentialchurchmovie.com to learn about where the movie's going to be on July 28th.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shannon. Thank you so much for taking time to interview, asking, and dealing with my weird sense of humor, and getting some of the behind the scenes of the making of this documentary, The Essential Church. So go ahead and go watch it. I did. It was fantastic. It made me cry sometimes, but it was a very powerful, moving piece on why the church is essential, and we need to make Christ Lord over the church and not Caesar. God bless.
The church says to every authoritarian government, there is a power and authority higher than you. Our calling is not first to comply with your laws. We must obey God rather than men.